ahead and hit record. Okay, excellent. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Tonight we have Cat Purcell, who's going to be our instructor, and she's going to be discussing resume basics and hopefully giving you some tips and tricks for how to make your resume help you get that job. It is part of our Get That Job series. If you want to hear more about that series, we do have some slides we can share that have a list of the upcoming workshops and show you how to sign up at the end if need be. I do want to say my name is Susan Winkler. I am actually our technology librarian here at the Champaign Public Library. And you may be familiar with Jordan Neal. She's our career librarian. So I am assisting today with the webinar instead. And if you aren't familiar with Zoom, I'm going to go over a couple of details about Zoom here real quick. So if you look in the bottom left-hand corner is where you can control your volume and your speaker. And then in the middle, you should have a raise hand button. Feel free to use that if you have any technical issues or questions that I can assist you with. And then there's also a chat bubble. And the chat bubble, you can use that. Feel free to ask questions in the chat bubble. If you ask them there, I will relay them to Kat so that she can answer them. And if you prefer to say your question out loud instead of typing it, at the end, we'll have some time where we can unmute you, and then you can ask your question out loud as well. Okay. I do want to give you a little bit of information about the library. We are open for grab and go services. We will be extending our hours starting March 29th as well, and we will continue to be doing these webinars as well. If you have any questions about that, we also update that information on our website, which is champaign.org. Okay, and now I'd like to go ahead and introduce Cat Purcell. Kat is a library associate here at the Champaign Public Library. She assists at the information desk and also assists Jordan Neal, our career librarian, with these career webinars. Hi, Kat.
Hi. Well,
how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty great. How are you?
Not too bad. I'm ready to learn some resume basics.
Yeah, here we go. And I want to let you guys know I like to keep a conversational webinar. So if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat. Susan will interrupt me if I don't see them. And that is just fine with me. I'm going to go ahead and open up my PowerPoint here and get going on my screen share. All right, is that showing? Are you guys able to see just the PowerPoint or my entire slide still?
We are still seeing the entire slides.
Interesting. I think it could be because I have a double monitor set up and it's only sharing on
if you turn off the other monitor just at the base, okay, it should let you go ahead and go into full screen with it.
Okay, bear with me, guys. I'm not used to using two monitors.
We're so fancy, right?
Here, let me see if I can just do that.
If you can start it over, yeah, try again.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and stop my video.
All right. Does this look like
there you go.
The whole thing? All right, yep. We're ready to go.
Got it now.
Cool. So the downside of this is now I can't see the chat, unfortunately. So yes, please interrupt me, Susan, if we've got some questions.
Yep. Yeah, I'm monitoring chat, so feel free to put anything in the chat that you'd like.
Great.
For questions.
So today we're doing resume basics, which I'm sure you're aware of because you signed up for this webinar. But before we get into it, I just wanted to pop up the slide with my name and contact information if you have any questions further on, or maybe you forget it and you want to get in touch with me, or maybe you want the slides, just let me know. I'm really a great fan of email, so don't feel shy. Shoot me an email if you want to. So before we get into it, why have a resume? You know, interestingly enough, I opened Google today to a suggested article about why you don't need a resume. And it actually didn't answer that question. You do still need a resume. There's just a lot of great tips that can go into having one. So it serves as a summary of your experience and accomplishments. It catches the attention of the employer. It shows you're a good match for the position, and it gives you opportunity to interview. That's the goal, right? So here's some resume content and guidelines. So evaluate, review, and update your professional experiences. Make sure you're highlighting your transferable skills, highlight your measurable accomplishments, tailor your resume to the job requirements, and point out hard and soft skills. One of my go-to tips that a professor in college gave me was he always kept his resume like front and center on his desktop. computer so that he could update it anytime he did anything. So I like to keep what I call a master copy of my resume just right there on my desktop, so I can, anytime I do a webinar like this or go to a conference, I throw it on there in a different section. And then when I'm applying to a job, I can just choose the things that apply to that job, and that's how I'm making that resume tailored to the job I'm applying for. So let's go over some basic resume content. So it's like I was saying, maintain that master copy of your entire professional experience. If you're familiar with LinkedIn, LinkedIn is kind of a digital version of a resume where you can also easily do that. Resumes should be customized and tailored to the position. It can often be, people who are hiring tend to look at a million resumes, it seems like, for one job. So it can start to look kind of obvious when your resume looks like just a basic generic resume. And I don't mean that as in it's like a simple document. Just if you're, we'll go into some of the reasons why I'm personally not a fan of objectives, but it can look like it's a basic resume that you send to everybody when it says something like, my objective is to be gainfully employed. Like, yeah, great, we all know that. So try to tailor it to the position, incorporate technical and transferable skills, such as things like critical thinking, communication, and interpersonal skills. Through the pandemic, that's become a big focus of a lot of employers because a lot of people have been changing entire career fields. So keeping those interpersonal skills, those soft skills, works well in conflict situations, things like that could apply to any job. They're really going to be looking for those kinds of skills right now. So how do you create a resume? You can start from scratch. We have a lot of tools here through the Champaign Public Library. You can start with Gale courses. That's kind of there's a couple of in-depth courses on resume building and workshops through Gale courses. There's Job Now, which is another great one for getting your resume reviewed. I've done that myself through them. They've got a quick actual person who responds to a review of your resume. LinkedIn Learning has a lot of courses on it. Of course, LinkedIn itself can serve as a resume. I mentioned that went back there a little bit. I mentioned LinkedIn kind of serves as a digital resume. And one of the things that's cool about that is you can download the resume once you've created it on LinkedIn. And then
Kat,
Peter's, sorry, yeah.
We have our first question, and
Great.
it actually relates to LinkedIn.
Excellent.
Someone is wondering if it's best to do both a paper resume and an electronic version like LinkedIn, and to use LinkedIn as your electronic resume.
Yeah, I think it is great to have. One of the things hiring managers are seeing a lot of right now is having a paper resume that even includes a link like by your name or your telephone number with your LinkedIn form, because sometimes that can capture a lot of different things. You can put a lot of things on your LinkedIn resume that you can't transfer to a paper copy. So it's really good to think of those as two separate entities. It seems like a lot of work, like I said, which is why I keep that master copy on my desktop, because you're maintaining kind of two databases. But if you really just kind of focus on LinkedIn, because it has a downloadable copy too, that kind of makes it easier to just update as you go. And you maybe just re-download that LinkedIn resume every time you update LinkedIn, and that keeps it simple for you. But yeah, it is a good idea to think of a physical resume differently from a digital one. Some people, when interviews, I've had the case where I always still try to bring in a physical copy of a resume to jobs. When the last time I did that was when I got this one, and I asked if they still wanted to see it, and they specifically said, we looked at your LinkedIn, it's fine. But there are a lot of places who aren't checking out LinkedIn, so they would probably want a physical copy too, and you never know which one it is. So I hope that answers your question and wasn't too long-winded.
Thank you, Kat.
Yeah. If it was, let me know. Let me know if you have other questions. And thanks for jumping right in there with one. I love it. So another good one is Peterson's test prep. It used to be called the Testing and Reference Center, I think. We just called it Turk. So, but Peterson's is a really good reference center for creating a resume as well. We've also got a lot of resume generators that are just built into things now. So Career One Stop is a good website for that. You don't have to create an account or anything. You can just download a template and go. Job Now does that too. Google Docs, if you're familiar with Google or you use Gmail, you're going to want to check out the 9 dots in that corner next to your icon, your little name or your photo, whatever. Because if you click on that and go to Google Drive or Docs, you'll see a bunch of templates. Microsoft Word also includes a lot of templates for resumes in there. Illinois Job Link, which if you're doing IDES for unemployment, you might be really familiar with them. They also have resumes in there. And then resumebuilder.com is also a really great one that you don't have to create an account for. I did it just refreshing this slideshow about a couple weeks ago and didn't have to create an account, created a great resume just by putting my information in too. So before we get into more details about the types of resumes, I want to point out 3 specific types of resumes. The first one is chronological, and that's probably the most commonly thought of as one. It's just showing a steady stream of employment or work history, usually going backwards in time. It showcases progression over the course of a career, and it's usually recommended for people who have like a consistent and robust work experience. Anymore, I'm finding those less used and utilized. I don't think that they're bad. I think a lot of hiring managers even prefer those because they're easier to read and they're more traditional. But we're finding out right now, especially a lot of people are having some gaps in their employment history. So maybe the chronological isn't your go-to because you've got a bit of a gap right now, and that's okay. So functional and combinations are both types that kind of gloss over the gap or explain the gap, or maybe you jumped career fields, and so those are going to be the ones that you'll want to look for using. And I'll go over examples here in a bit. So the functional resume emphasizes and focuses your experience. It highlights the transferable skills. It's usually recommended for recent graduates. Maybe you don't have a long work history, but you've got a lot of experience in volunteering or other activities. It's good for new career or switching careers for job seekers. And it's also really great for employment gaps. And then there's combination resumes. These can include images and infographics, online portfolios or websites. This is usually the type that's recommended for creative fields. So if you're a graphic design artist, maybe you work in business or sales and you want to include like a sales graph of showing your progression of how you improved a company, like this would be a really great thing to incorporate into your resume. So before we get going and continue on, I just kind of quiz the participants to see what kind of resume do you plan to use. So feel free to go ahead and type that in the chat. If you want to be unmuted, raise your hand and Susan can do that. But just want to kind of focus on what you guys are interested in.
I'll say, at least for me, the last time I had to write a resume was almost 10 years ago, and it was straight chronological. And now I think if I were to do it again, I would try to do a functional probably.
Yeah. When I applied here, I used a functional one. And I would say it mostly still looked chronological. It had my name at the top and contact information, but then I really focused on the summary, which was kind of like a paragraph of all of the things I'd used. I come from a really big background where I've worked for the Boy Scouts and kids museums and libraries. So I have kind of a lot of weird work experience that can be transferable anywhere. So I wanted to focus on that. And then I kind of went into the job history at the bottom, like not an afterthought, but so that it was clear that I had a bunch of skills from lots of areas.
We have another participant that says that they would also probably do a functional resume.
Okay.
And also they do have a gap and it for health, because of health reasons, and they're
Yeah.
wondering if that's something they should mention or not.
That's up to you. I will say that when I use the functional resume to apply here, I didn't just do it because I had kind of a spotty like career field background where I'd worked in a lot of areas, but I specifically had a chunk of time I was unemployed too. And that for me was because I was a new mom, I moved states, and my dad wasn't in the best of health. So how I worked around that, because you never know how a company is going to react to that, it's like being a parent or taking care of a parent at the same time, is as I put just planned leave of absence during that time period. And then based on the interview, you can decide how you want to reveal that. So if you get a chance to look up, like if you just Google employment gap responses, you can find a good list of ways that describe why you were unemployed without it sounding like, oh, I was just unemployed, which it's rarely the case. But it is a tricky situation. Now a lot of people are just saying I was laid off because of the pandemic, because everybody kind of understands that one. But yeah, if it's a medical concern, you don't have to go into detail about that at all, and it's not expected that they ask you about it up front. So yeah, I really recommend just listing the dates because it's unavoidable, and just saying planned leave of absence or something to that effect. And then they'll ask you about it and you can decide how you feel responding. So we'll go into functioning resumes, and I'll try to spend some more time on that then, because it sounds like most people always pretty much know about chronological ones. So before you even really get going with your resume content, ensure your contact information is correct. You don't want to have left your last address or phone number on the resume and forgotten to change it, and then they don't offer you the job because they couldn't get a hold of you. So it's a good idea to include simple headers, have like a really good like bold name, email, contact information at the top. Try to keep your descriptions to 3 to 5 really brief ones or bullet points. Avoid long paragraphs. The only time I have an exception for that personally is if you, like I said, we're like a sales manager. I reviewed a resume for a guy who worked at a car dealership. So he had a big chunk of paragraph where he described, the car sales that he had made and the progression that he had made in his commissions. And so that's a totally appropriate time to have a paragraph. Start with strong action-oriented words. Avoid starting sentences with I. Yeah, it's about you, but you don't want to sound like I had the best sales of everyone on the team. Minimize abbreviations and career jargon if you can, if you're changing career fields. I would say keep the career jargon if you're continuing to work in the same field, because they might know the platforms you're familiar with working with. So a good way to think about starting a fresh resume is focus on how are you going to benefit the employer with the skills you have, and then go from there. So a good format is style and size and color consistent throughout. And that doesn't necessarily mean like your work history line font is the exact same as the descriptions for each work history, but make sure that all of your job description titles are bolded and nothing else is, or something like that. Keep your font size between 11 and 14. This is something that will really make a difference if you're handing that physical resume in. Keep the font pretty basic. Don't use Webdings, because no one can read that. But it doesn't also have to be just a Times New Roman. Arial and Calibri are really good ones to use too for that. And always try to keep in mind resume scanning software and employer expectations. So remember that there are two parts of resumes submissions now. Half the time it's probably going to be read by a computer first. So try to keep the information you're putting on it something you can easily copy and paste into a box on a website if you need it to be, but also that eventually if it gets past that computer, a human's going to look at it too. Check your grammar and spelling. Proofread and repeat. Even if you think you got it down, it's always a great idea to hand it to somebody else, even if it's just your spouse or friend, just to say, hey, look this over and see if anything looks weird. Because at a certain point, you've looked at that resume so much, it looks perfect, or you can't tell the difference between one thing and another. And it's really easy to miss those little details. 1 to 2 pages is usually preferable. When I was growing up, I heard keep it to 1 page and 1 page only. And that was what my go-to was. But that's not necessarily the case anymore. If you've got a good history of really transferable skills, keep it to 2 pages. Maybe not 2 full pages, but it's definitely reasonable to have 1.5 pages or so. And still include some white space. Remember, you're not trying to hand in a book report. It doesn't have to be totally descriptive. Nice print paper is fine anymore because a lot of resumes are submitted online. Employers aren't really expecting you to hand it in on nice thick cardstock paper anymore. It's perfectly fine to come here and make your resume at the library and print it off our printer and hand that in. I don't think people are going to expect that to be anything different than that. If you're making a creative resume, you want to have maybe 2 different versions where you keep that creative resume a PDF to be sent in as an email attachment or something, or keep it for the physical hand-in and have like a plain document for your regular one. Because even if you're applying to a creative job, if the company is big enough, you're still going to have to submit that online. So it might need to be something easily read or scanned in. So speaking about that, let's go over some applicant tracking systems. Tailor your resume. One of my go-to tips is to, before you apply to that job, read the job description on the website or wherever you're finding the job information about, and don't copy the exact wordings, but if they use specific phrases, replicate that in the skills that apply to how you could do that or what you did in past jobs, because those keywords that they use in that prescription or description are going to be kind of flagged by the applicant tracking system. So keep your consistent formatting for your work history and dates. The hardest thing to do with the resume, if I'm reviewing it, is if your titles or your years are inconsistently formatted. Like sometimes they're bold, sometimes they're not, sometimes they're on the left hand of the screen, sometimes they're on the right hand of the page. That can be really frustrating. Even if it makes sense and there's not a whole lot of data, it can be tricky on the eyes. So it's great to utilize standard headers like professional experience instead of work history. So versus, more about me or profile. I do see a lot of people using summaries now, and that's great. I think summaries or objectives can be really beneficial, but having a more conversational tone isn't necessarily best on a resume. Avoid graphics, logos, icons, tables, columns, and specialized design elements unless you're applying to that. If there's a reason you want to show off that you're great at tables in a Word document, go for it, because that's going to look really classy. But if it's not something you're familiar with, I would steer away from it. So creative elements, if you can distribute directly to the employer in person, go for it. Try to keep it in a docs or a PDF file format. PDFs are really great because you're sending them and that's kind of uneditable by whoever you're sending it to. But docs, as in like a Word document or Google can download to docs. That is great because it's pretty easily read no matter what kind of operating system the person is reading it on. You can read it. So I kind of already answered this question, but I want to see if you were listening. When should you get creative with your resume? And if you're one of those people who should get creative, let me know. I'd love to chat with you. I started out in school as an art major, so that was really, particularly in the early 2000s, like everybody was pushing using Illustrator for a resume. And it took me a while to learn how to make a standard Word document one. So if you have a creative resume, I'm curious, when should you use one?
I don't see anything so far, but I would say that I would get creative with my resume if I was doing exactly what you were saying, if I was an art major or, applying for a job as a graphic designer or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so if you're doing a creative job, go for it. When I applied here to work at the library, I didn't use a full creative resume, but I did do some snazzy headers and use a table just to show that I have some good formatting experience, because you never know at a library what you could be doing from day to day. So there might be some exceptions, but they're usually, unless you're applying for a job where you're going to use some art skills, keep it to the standard document. So we'll keep going. All right, so here's an example of chronological one. I'll probably breeze past these ones a little bit, so if you want to see something more, let me know. But I think we're all pretty familiar with what a chronological resume looks like. I used this one specifically from I think this one was a Google Drive template. So you see at the top there's a summary. That's kind of where I was talking about how it's a good idea to use a paragraph. And then it goes right into her experience. It's clear that she has not used a whole lot of experience, and she had a gap in her employment history. So here you can use an example of how they decided to describe their planned leave of absence, and leave it at that. And then you can go into addressing it later. So this one does go over into the second page. You see there we've got some qualifications there at the bottom, and memberships. So those can always be some good things to add, particularly if you're involved with a community and that might apply to your position. So here's an example. I was talking about objectives versus summaries. Here we have an objective on the one side: to obtain a production manager position with supervisory responsibilities at Aramark Industries. This is when I think it's a good idea to use an objective. It's clear that this person wrote that objective with the specific industry in mind. So these are just snapshots of examples. They're not actual people, but I would hope that later on he does something more in his resume to show me he did more than just look up the company name. But that is an example of where an objective is a good idea. And then here we go into that summary. As a professional with a record of success as a career counselor, I'm looking for a position within a setting that is diverse and will utilize my knowledge in the area of career management and counseling that will allow me to be enthusiastic and engaging students who will make a difference in the reputation of your learning facility. So this person has clearly also researched the job. They're using a lot of words that I would guess were found in that job description. And it's also using words that sound very full of action and enthusiasm. So she sounds like she's probably a go-getter of some kind. So those are some examples, and you can use whichever one works for you. Typically, when another bit of advice I would use versus objectives versus summaries, if you're applying to a job that maybe has a lot of different angles that you might get into, or areas of expertise, or maybe you're applying to not an outright creative job, but maybe if you're a teacher or something, a summary would be a great place to go into more descriptions. I think in a lot of management positions, or if you're in industries with cars or factories, probably just a simple objective is fine. The types of people who are doing hiring management there probably aren't going to want a fluffy summary. So just tailor to your job environment. So here we just got a little bit more detail, profile or summary, just 2-sentence statements that grabs the reader's attention and highlights skills. An objective is just a brief statement that defines the type of employment you seek and your career goals. So another way to think of it as an objective is what I want from the employer or you. A summary is what I can offer you. So here's what I have done that I could bring to you. I'm just probably going to skip through these for a little bit because we're already halfway through and I have a lot of examples. I know you want to show or see some functional ones. So if you want me to slow down, I can. And we can also send these slides to you at the end too, if you want to look over them more briefly or more in depth. So here's another example where a profile or a summary uses that space to show off the software design that they're really great at in a creative field. It's another good use of a summary there. So the difference is on the focus. The objective statements usually say, this is what I want, and a profile summary statements say, this is what I can offer you. So there's another example of how that can be used if you're using that space to change careers. So before we go on, are there any other questions about chronologicals or objective versus summaries?
No questions so far, but I do encourage you to go ahead and pop them into the chat. Oh, yes,
Yeah.
we have a question.
Yeah,
okay.
Great.
With a chronological resume, would you object to someone using a Word template?
I wouldn't. No, I think templates are great. I use them. I've used them myself. Templates are great because if you're not familiar with using a resume, it tells you exactly what you need to do to fill in those spots, and you can send it on as is, but it also gives you the room to be creative. You can change the headings up. Maybe you prefer to say work experience versus professional history or something like that, and you can still make those creative choices as well. So I think there's a lot of flexibility to a template. Sure, hiring managers, know that Word templates and Google Docs templates exist, but they're there because they're great and they're easy to use and easy to fill out. The only thing I would do is when using a template, make sure you catch all of the fields on that template. So if it's not a subject area that you feel like you need to use, maybe you don't need to put a certificates section. Make sure you clear out the certificates box, just delete the whole box. I have had resumes handed in to me to review that have the lorem ipsum, that like junk gibberish text still left in it. So please make sure you don't leave that in. That's the only word of caution I would have for using templates. They're great. And no one that I've met in hiring management or talked about through this Get That Job series has rejected them. I think they're great.
I'll ask a follow-up question. Do you have a preference yourself for either Google Docs templates versus Word templates versus maybe Job Now templates or any of those?
Yeah, for my personal one, I prefer Google Docs because I have a Gmail account already. And I love Google Drive because it's right there. It's a cloud-based storage unit. So I know that if I can log into my Gmail, my resume is right there. I do still keep that desktop version, but yeah, the one I keep in my Google Docs is more up to date actually than my desktop version anymore. So yeah, I prefer Google Docs over any of the others. I've used the Job Now templates. I've used the resume builders just because I know with this job, it's important for me to stay up on those things so I can make sure I know what other people are using. I know Monster and LinkedIn all have those too. They're great because they're good templates that are easy to just copy and paste your information in if you've already got it made up. But yeah, I think the great thing about these different resources is, experiment with them. Don't spend more than an hour or so, but experiment with them and see which one works for you better.
And these are all free resources too.
They're all free. Yeah.
That you can easily access here at the library too. Rather than just going into say Google and typing free resume service, which may not really be free.
Yes, yeah, I would caution against that. I usually tend to reference sites in my slides here that are all free because it's just through the library and through Google Docs and Word. I just don't want to see you spend money if you don't have to, if I already know you're looking for a job. So please, if you can avoid paying for a resume template, do it because there's no need to. So yeah, the next kind of slide, unless you've got more questions, and let me know if we do, is professional experience. So this can be your job history or work history, however you want to word it. We've got a couple of different bulleted examples here. You can see the one on the left is a senior mechanical engineer. So he's got some bullet points listed there. But then we also see this other one who is a general manager. where it describes kind of the overview of what he did at each position and then goes into some bulleted points. And so depending on what type of job you did, that's gonna reflect more of the kinds of stuff you'd want to get into that job. How descriptive do you want to be? And if you've got a lot of experience, maybe a bulleted list is good for you, because you want to save that space to list out all the different career fields you'd had in the past. And maybe if you don't have that, or you have very specific jobs to pull from, this one where you're using a combination is a good idea. And these are also both taken from templates that you can find either through Microsoft Word or Google Docs. So some key components of professional experience: list your most recent job first and work backward. That is even the case if you do a functional one. Please try to focus on chronological backwards, just because that's what hiring managers are used to reading. Try to include the following information no matter what: your company name and location, the job title, at least the job title when you left it. Like if you got promoted, that's a good thing to throw in there on one of the bulleted points, but have the most recent job title you had when you left. The dates employed there, years at a minimum. So if you are a new hire or just out of school, that's when it's really appropriate to have those, like, March 2012 to, well, gosh, that dates me a little bit. Maybe March 2020 to September 2020, or roles and responsibilities and key accomplishments then after that. But it is appropriate if you worked at a place for more than a year to just keep it to the years. So it's also good to have relevant professional experience. So if you have any professional experience that doesn't necessarily fall into a job that you recently had, like while you were on leave, maybe you volunteered, or maybe you were part of a community group and you were the treasurer, you can include that in your professional experience, because that can apply and carry over. Just remember, you don't have to have been paid at a job to have professional experience. So it's good to also go into your roles and responsibilities and key accomplishments in those paragraphs after your job title and heading. So a few sentences or bullet points, focus on the action verbs and the key roles, any transferable skills. If you were ahead of any projects and you did something great for the company or improved their output in any way, it's really good to include that information. Measurable goals are really key and are going to stick out a lot to somebody who's reading your resume. So good ideas to include: promotions, any merit increases. If you got any commendations from managers, clients, or customers, include those in there. If you improved budgets or were in charge of those, include that. If you have performance reviews and evaluations that apply, definitely include those in. Awards or letters of recommendation are all great things to include. Now, with letters of recommendation, I typically recommend that people don't actually include those on the resume. We might say at the bottom, like, letters of recommendation upon request or something, just to let them know you have them already. So try to think of, like, what did you achieve at the job that made you feel proud of the work you did? What tasks did you improve while you were there? Were there any special projects or committees you were on? What would a supervisor or colleague say about your accomplishments? Sometimes if you are out of a bad job, maybe when you didn't leave on the best of terms for whatever reason it's hard to think about it positively, but I guarantee there are ways that you improved that position, and try to focus on those areas. And that's going to show in that resume. So another question: which field works best for your resume? Accomplishments, skills, experience? You're going to use a combination, functional or chronological? Just let me know. And if you have opinions, maybe you're somebody who's a little bit further along in life and you're looking for a job. Do you think it is going to be more helpful for you to have accomplishments or work experience on your resume? How, using these verbs can really improve how people view your resume.
We have a comment in the chat of combination.
Great, combination, yeah. Combinations are great. We're going to get into those too. Like I said, functional tends to just focus on your experience and skills, and functional is kind of like a great career path use.
I know for me, I think accomplishments sounds just like, it just sounds better to me. So you can have experience, but it could be, you can have a negative experience or a good experience. But if you have accomplishments, that's a very positive word.
I agree. I've seen resumes that have an experience setting or like a work history thing. And then they have, I saw one once that really stuck out to me where above their work history, they had accomplishments and skills in like a 2-table format. And their accomplishments like listed out raises they got, or I'm trying to like not disclose too much about the person, but sales forces that they did. And then the skills were like a list of databases or programs that they were good at. So this person specifically tended to work in more of a sales or business setting, but they wanted to change career paths. And so they had a lot of experience in Photoshop and Illustrator. And so they listed that out in the skill setting to show, I have this sales side that I'm really good at, but I also can get really creative, and that could bring your company a lot of things. And I thought that was really powerful. So with that being said, and if you have any questions, again, feel free to jump in, and we're going to go on to the next one. So how are you going to talk about your education? So a lot of times, I think in a chronological traditional sense, education is usually kind of listed at the top, but I'm starting to see them listed more on the bottom now. And that's for people who have recently graduated, but also people who have been in the workforce for a long time and are now looking for a new job too. And I think that's a good idea, because I think education is very important. Obviously, I work at a library, but it's not always the end all be all of what a person can bring to the company. I have specifically applied to 2 different jobs in different companies and gotten them without having the degree in which that was the career field for. Like, for instance, like I said, I got my degree in Bachelor's of Fine Arts, and here I am working in the library, and I don't have a master's in library science, and that's okay, because I was able to bring the experience to the company. So I think it's really great to have an education setting. If you've got multiple degrees that apply, throw them all in there. If you have multiple degrees, but they don't apply, then maybe leave them out. That's okay. Because I have also worked with people who have specifically been turned down because they come off as looking too educated for the job. And that sounds unfortunate. But I think a lot of people in my generation are really running into that, particularly because we were kind of all told, you better go to get your undergrad, get your master's, and now we're having to find some positions that don't require those degrees. So just some things to keep in mind with the education section. So always list the name of the institution and the location. There can be multiple University of Illinois, so we kind of know. So then go into your degree and certification that's earned. And if you can, put that year of your degree. If you're on the erring on the side of you're a more experienced applicant, maybe putting that year on for your degree could hurt you as well, because we do unfortunately see some ageism in the application system. So if you have already had your work history listed out with your dates on all of those, you could maybe just leave off the year that you graduated if it was a while back. And if it still applies, that's fine. You just wait for them to ask, because they'll know once you get there for an interview. And if you've got the skills, then it shouldn't matter. So specific education stuff. So try to keep the wording as like associate, bachelor's, master's, or PhD level. I would say a grade point average is appropriate if you're a new graduate. If you're not a new graduate, then it probably, unfortunately, doesn't really matter. If you want to throw it on there, great. But if you're short on space, I'd say that's probably the first thing to cut. Include honors if you've got them. May include graduate and postgraduate work. So if you did anything specifically for that graduate or postgraduate degree, go ahead and include that because that's going to look great. So if you've got the higher education, feel free to leave off your high school degree. And if you don't, if it's a position that doesn't require a higher education, then yeah, keep your high school degree on there or your GED. Totally appropriate either way. And it's also a great idea to keep professional certifications or licenses that apply on there. So in the library world, it's really great. It's a great and encouraging thing to go to conferences. So if you went to any good conferences that really helped improve your job or your work experience, throw them on there too. It shows that you're a lifelong learner. So different additional considerations to add on towards maybe the end of your resume: volunteer work, military experience, skills, group and organizations. I cannot, I can't fail to mention the number of times, including that I worked for the Boy Scouts of America, has helped me out one way or another in my life. So feel free to include those kinds of things. Internships or experiences or externships, presentations, publications, or workshops you may have done. If you did a TED Talk, please put that on your resume. Professional development is always a plus. Maybe tend to leave off, unfortunately, any religious affiliations or political affiliations, just because you never know the background of the person reading your resume, and those things might be really good things to talk about, and you might find you have them in common, but you might not. So those are good things to leave off. So transferable skills, which I talked about earlier. This one is an example from Career One Stop. Communication, people really like to hear about people who love to communicate. So if you're really good at the written word or speaking or using communication tools, please include that, because that's really helpful to any employer across the board. If you're good at critical thinking, if you're good at analyzing issues or problem solving, strategic planning, decision making, throw those words in there, because those are going to be great things for any hiring manager too. So self-management, good time manager, organized, self-motivated, responsible, reliable, those are all good things to include too. One of the go-to questions on any interview, and sometimes even the application process, is like, name a weakness about yourself or a way that you have had to deal with a difficult situation. And my personal one that is a go-to for me is I tend to be a little scatterbrained. If you've noticed, I can jump around from subject area to subject area. So I didn't used to be very good at time management or being organized at all. And then I discovered like this amazing planner I don't leave home without, and that helps me organize my thoughts and stay on track of things. So that's an example of a weakness and showing, you're a good time management, because those are going to be really good skills. So keep understanding, diplomatic, discreet, supportive, assertive. Those are probably terms that you're not going to use as much on a resume, but they're good things to bring up if you have the chance.
Hey,
so
Kat.
Yeah.
We do have a question about experience and resume. And when you were talking about the things to include and what you might leave off, if you have a very extensive career experience in the field and you're presenting your resume, how much do you recommend that someone would include in that resume? So if you've had, 15 or 30 years or 20 years of experience in the field and you're looking for a job in that same field, how much of that do you think you would include for your experience or your work history section?
I would keep it. I tend to recommend people not go back more than either 5 jobs or 15 years on your resume. So if you had like 15 years at one job, definitely include that. That's great. If you didn't, but you've got maybe 15 years worth of experience across a couple different positions, still include that, but maybe that'd be like a great summary addition. Like maybe you were a nurse at 7 different hospitals across the span of 30 years working, and you're still out there trying to find a job. Maybe include that in your summary and only list the last few jobs. Does that make sense? I hope that answers the question. So it is good to go more than a page if you've got all of that, but I do understand. I have worked with several customers who've experienced some ageism, so it can be tricky showing that you're experienced without showing you're too experienced, which is unfortunate. But yeah, please feel free to chime in if that answers your question. I sure hope it does.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So yeah, that's usually what I've seen. So try not to go back more than 5 jobs or more than 15 years of experience. But it does still look really good on a resume if you've got that much experience in 1 or 2 positions. It's still a desirable trait because it shows you're loyal. Okay, so let's go into some more examples. We already kind of looked at Jamie chronological, so I'm going to skip that one. Let's look at Sue combination, because I know we had somebody ask about using a combination resume. So here we see that she has started out with her summary, but she's also got her experience listed directly under that. So this shows that she has a lot of transferable skills, and you can see she's even added another side column off to the side here that has all of the skills that she's used. I recently saw a resume like this with a nurse because she was able to use that skills column for all of the different procedures and equipment that she was well trained on, without having to waste a lot of space in her experience side of the resume, to cut off more positions that she really needed to utilize for that area too.
Would
and she also, sorry.
Sorry, I have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
With the thought of not having columns or boxes or things broken out like that, is there another way you'd recommend someone do a skills section where they can include that much information?
Yes. So another option is, I was mentioning about that other guy's resume that I saw where he had his skills listed, and he had it listed at the top underneath his summary section as a bulleted list. So he had now it worked for him in that way because he used the skills as more like 1 or 2 word examples of areas he was good at.
Okay.
So it worked for a bulleted list there if you're not used to the whole table setup. But I will tell you this one, as it says down on the bottom, it was created using a Google Docs template. I think it's the one I think in the original, the title is bright blue if you just look at the screen. And it's got that column already set up in there with a bunch of like lorem ipsum. So it's got that, and you don't have to create it yourself if you want to use something like this for your own job. And then we still see, yeah, thank you for that question. It's a really good one because it is really tricky with the formatting. And especially if you're not someone who's really familiar with using these documents, it can be a little intimidating. So yeah, this is a template. Feel free to go to Google Docs and experiment with it. So here's another example. This one is using a Microsoft Word template. This is a chronological one again, where you see it starts with the experience right off the bat and then goes backwards in time. It looks like this person is fairly new to the workforce. They've got a lot of 2014 to 2016. It looks like they probably are just out of high school. So they did a really good job of creating those bulleted lists to show their experience without possibly having a whole lot of paid experience. And we also see here's another functional example. This one is also another Google Docs template where it's got the easily bolded sidelines there, but they're this person, Joe, he works in construction, so he doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of detail that needs to be gone into what he's done in his jobs. So he can kind of clearly list out his skills and related experience. And I believe this one, I actually have a second page that's got his work history on the back, so it's more condensed. So this is probably a good one to use if you're switching career fields or wanting to use the emphasis on your experience versus your work history. So here we've got another chronological example, and it looks like we're starting to come up on time. So I kind of will leave it at that. I'm going to breeze past these here for the career services we offer. Gale courses, Job Now, LinkedIn Learning, and Peterson's Tech Prep. And this goes all into some details on it. Gale courses is more extensive. Job Now is like a great place to create one and then submit it for review. LinkedIn Learning is got amazing videos. It's a part of LinkedIn that we offer a paid side through the library with your library card on. But if you're already on LinkedIn, you can check it out by going to our website to start with and then going to LinkedIn Learning. Excuse me, I have definitely been talking for about an hour. So if you have any questions, I want to use this chance for you guys to raise your hand or ask any other further questions. I'm going to leave this slide up here so you can jot down my email or my phone number if you want to get in contact with me further. But please jump in and let us know if you have any questions before we wrap up.
And you can feel free to either put them in the chat, or again, as Kat said, we can unmute you if you want to raise your hand, and I can unmute you so you can speak questions out loud if you have any.
Yeah. And I'm going to also put my email in the chat here too, if that's helpful for you to just copy and paste.
And we also do offer the book a librarian appointments too, right, Kat?
We do, yeah. So if you want to meet one-on-one, we do book a librarians through the website, or you can shoot me an email, either way, and I'll sit down with you. We can do a Zoom call. We are open to the public, so you can just come on in and ask for Kat, and if I'm there, I'll come on out and help you. But yeah, I can meet with you one-on-one, limited time in person, but we could still do it Zoom. Sorry, let's see, we got a question. Does it look bad?
Oh, Kat, you might want to put your mic on. Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. I can go ahead and read it if you like, and then.
I got it though, thank you.
Okay.
So does it look bad to be ongoing in school under education? Absolutely not. That looks great. Maybe if you haven't finished your degree yet, that's okay. Include that you're going to school currently. It shows two things. It shows that you're maybe wanting to get into a different career field, and it shows that you are continuing your education. So that's always a great thing to see as an employer, because we want people who are going to want to learn new skills. So it's a great skill no matter what it is. So if you just list present and have it like the topmost thing, that would be a good way to show that. But it doesn't have to be your top either. It could be wherever you want to put it in a resume. Yeah, absolutely include it. Yeah, very few people are ongoing education and not currently employed. I know for at least over a decade ago, that wasn't the case for me. I was working 3 jobs while I was in school, and I still don't know how I did it, but somehow I finished. So it's good.
Yeah.
Copies of slides. Yes, absolutely. I will get the email address from our sign up, and I will email them out to you for sure. I'm going to write that down. So
and Kat, do you think for most folks, when you're putting education and you're currently enrolled in something, would you put a expected completion, or would you just leave that off?
Yeah, it depends. If you know and you're pretty sure I'm going to be graduating May 2022, go ahead and put that in there. If you're not sure, if you've switched majors, or you think you might have to do a little bit more, if you're a non-typical student where you're working full-time and you're going to school and you don't really know, it's okay to leave it off. But yeah, if you know an estimated date of graduation, it's great to include that. That was a good question, Susan.
Any other questions? All right. Well, I know that Kat is more than willing to help out. And if you need any help or you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out either via email, which you put in her chat, excuse me, or or through the Book of Librarian on our website, or even just calling on the phone here at the library. We are very happy to help, and all of our desk staff here are also willing to get you started and help get you started with resumes and everything there. I think, Kat, you did include your email address on the slides, right?
Yes, my email's on the slides. They'll be going out when I send them out. And yes, I'm available for meetings. Shoot me an email before you log off if you want to tonight, and I'll set one up with you when I get back in the office tomorrow.
And as part of the Book of Librarians, you and Jordan also offer mock interviews, I think, too?
We do. Yeah. Jordan and I do mock interviews. I've done a couple of panel interviews, which tends to be the trend now. So if you want experience getting comfortable in that situation, let us know. If you just want to practice one-on-one, I'm happy to do that mock interview for you as well. I just finished up doing some for some middle schoolers. It was a blast, but I love doing them with adults too. It's a good experience. The more comfortable you are, the better.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate the time you spent with me, and I wish you luck. Yeah. Let me know. Let me just know either way.
Go ahead and put my video back on here too. All right. Well, if there are no other questions for tonight, I think we'll go ahead and say good night. And thank you everyone for attending today. And hopefully we'll see you around the library, or you'll be able to reach out and get some assistance if you need it. Yeah. Or want it for that matter. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.